Due to unidentified drones, the airport in Munich, Germany was forced to suspend its operations. The first reports about the drones reached the police around 10 p.m. To avoid endangering aircraft, airport operations were initially restricted and then suspended altogether. 17 flights and nearly 3,000 passengers were unable to depart from the airport. Another 15 planes that were supposed to land were redirected to other cities. The police were unable to detect the drones or determine their exact number according to their statements. They also failed to catch those who launched the drones. Meanwhile, it has become known that previous drone attacks are under investigation. German investigators are looking into the possibility that a vessel from the Russian Shadow Fleet may have been involved. Such a vessel was present in the Baltic at the time of the attack. Earlier media reported that crew members of the Shadow Fleet could have launched the drones. This theory is now being investigated in other countries as well. In Denmark, where drones recently also paralyzed airport operations, several high-level summits were taking place at the same time. First, EU leaders in a military circle discussed how to strengthen their own defense in light of greater threats, including the regular appearance of foreign drones in European airspace. As usual, they also talked about aid to Ukraine. The next day, the discussions continued in a broader circle. Leaders from the UK, Ukraine, Moldova, the Balkan countries and others joined the EU leaders. So how did the meetings go? And when will the drone wall be built? Our correspondent from Radio Liberty, Zoryana Stepanenko, will tell us more.
Foreign drones are being spotted more and more often. One day here, another day in a different EU country. A recent example happened in Germany. Last night, drones paralyzed operations at Munich airport. And in Denmark, which hosted the summit, drones recently halted operations at 6 airports. So the leaders met under unprecedented security measures matching the current challenges. Allied air defense systems were deployed, and not even civilian drones were allowed during the events. On the agenda were also methods to counter other, less benign, unmanned aerial vehicles. These methods are part of the overall strengthening of defense. The Danish Prime Minister, setting the tone for the summits, said that the bloc is in a state of hybrid war.
I think everyone underestimated just how serious a threat Russia poses. We should consider Ukraine as the first line of defense. We are doing a lot, but we need to move faster and scale up. I would say by 2035 it will be too late. When we talk about rearming Europe, we must be able to fully defend ourselves by 2030.
The discussion about the so-called drone wall, a network that should detect, intercept and shoot down devices that enter here, was supposed to become one of the most promising initiatives. The European Commission designated the project as a flagship potential, but the initiative was met with a rather lukewarm reception from the largest economies in Europe. Among the skeptics were Germany and France. The Polish Prime Minister explained this by the competition between manufacturers and the capabilities of developed countries that want to protect their own interests. But according to Tusk, no one doubted the idea itself. In the end, they agreed to keep negotiating. Perhaps the project will be renamed. Work on defense initiatives will continue, and a country with extensive modern military experience, Ukraine, is extending a helping hand to its partners. Ukrainian soldiers in Denmark are already sharing this experience. How to detect and shoot down attack drones, reported Volodymyr Zelensky, who also called on his colleagues in Copenhagen to coordinate efforts and keep up the pressure on Moscow.
The root of all these problems is the war that Russia is waging. Russia still has the resources to continue fighting, and that's wrong. But we know that the 19th package of sanctions against Russia is extremely necessary. We also need to seriously consider how to truly destroy the entire Russian oil trade infrastructure. It is precisely this that fuels their war machine.
The leaders also discussed the idea in the European Commission to provide Ukraine with a so-called reparations loan. The amount of 140 billion euros would serve as collateral Russian frozen assets. Ukraine will repay the loan if Russia pays its reparations. As a result, a number of countries called on the European Commission to further develop the idea. Belgium is especially resistant as Russian assets are held in its depositories. It demands that other countries share the risks with it and also requires legal protection in case of Russian lawsuits.
I can already hear from Moscow. If you touch my money, you will feel the consequences forever. We were the only ones who said fine. Now we have a hen that lays huge golden eggs. We can't keep the money for ourselves, we give it to the country. Others didn't do this. Let's eat all the hens, not just mine. This will be a key moment for Europe.
The Prime Minister of Belgium addressed the countries in whose territories there are also Russian assets in a rather figurative way. Regarding the reparations credit, The Prime Minister of Catania stated that there are some technical issues that need to be resolved. Chancellor Merz is optimistic and expects a decision this month at the next EU summit at the end of October. Zoryana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Svoboda, especially for TSN. Marathon, United News.
In the United States, it's the third day of the shutdown. The government has partially shut down because Republicans and Democrats in the Senate could not agree on the budget for the new fiscal year, which began in the United States on October 1st. So most federal employees have been sent on forced leave. And those who are working for pay will only be able to get paid after the shutdown ends. How long it will last is unknown, and the previous one, during Trump's first term, lasted over a month. How does this affect negotiations with Ukraine? After all, this week a delegation was working in Washington to discuss the details of the drone agreements. Were the negotiations able to take place, and what are the consequences? We will ask our own correspondent for TSCP, Olga Koshelenko, who is live with us now. Olechka, hello. What consequences of the shutdown in the States are already being felt, and in particular, how does it affect us?
Hello, Alla. So far, the partial shutdown of the American government has not directly affected Ukraine. I will tell you about the drone negotiations in a minute, but first, let's talk about the shutdown itself. So, as of Wednesday, 800,000 federal employees in the US have been placed on forced leave. This has indeed happened before in American history. As you mentioned, this isn't the first shutdown here, but this time President Donald Trump has promised to start mass layoffs. His logic is as follows. He says if so many people can be sent home and the government continues to function, then let's fire them. He wrote on Twitter USA that he can't believe the Democrats gave him this opportunity since reducing the size of the government was his campaign promise. The Department of Government Efficiency, which was headed by Elon Musk earlier this year, had already laid off quite a few people. Entire institutions were shut down, such as USIA or Voice of America. And it's also important to remember that civil servants in the United States are mostly Democratic voters, so Trump is hurting them doubly. Speaking about the layoffs, White House spokesperson Kirilla Inglewetz predicted that they would number in the thousands, and according to American media, they are set to begin today.
There will likely be thousands of them. That's a very good question. And unfortunately, this is the issue that the Office of Management and Budget and the entire White House team have to deal with today. These discussions, these conversations, and these meetings wouldn't be happening if the Democrats had voted to keep the government running.
A Ukrainian technical delegation led by Deputy Defense Minister Serhiy Boyev held negotiations in Washington this week with both the Pentagon and the State Department. They concerned two issues. The first is the so-called drone agreement. Ukraine is offering the United States cooperation in the field where Kyiv has enormous practical experience. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, Ukraine produced 2 million drones just last year. They are relatively inexpensive, costing only 20 to 30% of Western-made drones, and have been proven in practice. But there are certain difficulties. For example, Ukrainian drones contain Chinese components which cannot be used by the United States military. Therefore, according to the Wall Street Journal, reviewing the terms of the agreement could take several months. And aside from the aspect of this important cooperation with the United States, for Ukraine there is also the practical issue regarding the drone deal, since we need to earn money to supply ourselves with weapons from the United States. So the second issue raised here by the Ukrainian side is the supply of weapons. Currently, the issue of supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles such as Tomahawk and Barracuda is under consideration by the US president. Reuters wrote that it is unlikely the United States will be able to supply Ukraine with these weapons since, as they say, America itself is running short of them in its own warehouses. But this issue has not been removed from the agenda yet. And let's not forget that there are also ATACMS missiles, which the United States previously supplied to Ukraine. And with them, Ukraine also has the capability to strike Russia, or rather had earlier. Currently, this issue is on hold.
Ukraine's use of ATACMS missiles against targets in Russia is currently under review by the Pentagon, and not a single missile has been launched at Russian territory since Trump became president. Trump officials said that they are currently considering Ukraine's request for long-range American weapons and have already approved providing Kyiv with intelligence for its own strikes on targets within Russian energy infrastructure, which it is carrying out using drones.
And I just want to remind you that, according to media reports, the United States this week approved the provision of intelligence to Ukraine specifically related to Russian energy infrastructure. It's important to understand that intelligence sharing existed before, but this time it specifically concerns oil refining, pipelines, power generation stations, and the logic of the American administration is that strikes should be carried out on those facilities in Russia that help the Kremlin earn money, which is then spent on the war. So if he doesn't agree to cooperate voluntarily, then they will help Ukraine in this way. And if, as was just mentioned in the quote, the issue of supplying long-range missiles is still not resolved, Ukraine can strike these targets with its own drones, which have proven their effectiveness. And in this way, the issue is already developing. Hello?
Thank you, Olga. Russia is already getting nervous. This is what Germans think about the reunification of Germany 35 years later. Today is a public holiday in Ukraine as they celebrate 35 years since the reunification of Germany. The celebrations are taking place in the city of Saarbrücken. The main guest of the event was French President Emmanuel Macron. He began his speech in German and also shared a personal memory of October 3rd, 1990. He said that when the Berlin Wall fell, he already realized that it was a defining event. Macron reminded that after 80 years of peace in Europe, an era of confrontation began. Germany must learn to defend itself again. This was stated in a speech by Chancellor Friedrich Merz. That is why the German government is increasing defense spending and preparing for hybrid attacks. At the same time, the country needs economic reforms, less bureaucracy, and an update of social policy, the Chancellor believes. Former Chancellor Angela Merkel criticized Macron's invitation because, in her opinion, for such a symbolic date, it would have been better to invite someone from East Germany or Eastern Europe. This event continues as a large-scale festival with art, music, and organized discussions. Tens of thousands of people attended it. New surveys show that almost all Germans consider reunification to have been the right decision. But both in the West and the East, people admit that problems remain even 35 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
For us, the French, and for all Europeans, October 3rd is also a day of celebration. There are events in history so great and significant that everyone remembers where they were at that moment and what they were doing. The reunification of Germany is just such an event, no matter where we lived at the time or how old we were.
New alliances of autocracies are forming against us. They attack liberal democracy, our way of life. And these attacks come not only from outside, but also from within. Another challenge has been years of unregulated migration. It has divided the country and created new tensions in society. That is why we must change if we want to preserve what we have and make the future even better than it was before.